from the Penn Libraries.
Good morning. My name is John Pollack, and I'm one of the staff members at the University of Pennsylvania Libraries. I'd like to welcome this morning Clemens Nathan, who is visiting the United States. He has been on a tour of several sites. He spoke to cadets at the United States Military Academy at West Point, and yesterday he gave a large conference on the subject of human rights in the 21st century here at the University of Pennsylvania. This morning, we're delighted to have Clemens Nathan here at the University of Pennsylvania Libraries, where he's going to make some remarks on a subject about which he's a great expert. His topic this morning is tackling discrimination as a precursor to genocide. Thank you so much, Clemens Nathan, for being with us this morning.
I'm delighted to be here in this beautiful library, and I will do my best to speak on this subject for a little while. Education to tackle discrimination has always been a problem throughout civilization worldwide. Some have been forgotten or deliberately excluded by those who have been responsible for improving the condition of all those who needed help to bring order out of chaos and envelop those who were deprived into the community. Dishonesty by those in power upholding preconceived ideas on their interpretation of justice has again and again happened. The Greeks chose to exclude the slaves in their society. Justinian only protected Roman citizens with his laws. Magna Carta, as you know, was only for the gentry, and your Declaration of Independence was remarkable, but was interpreted by those in power to exclude slaves and women, although, of course, this was not mentioned in the Declaration. The dramatic affair in Paris in 1894 of Alfred Dreyfus, a Jewish officer in the French army who was wrongly accused of espionage and was dishonestly judged by its army officers. It was the outcry of Émile Zola and others which ultimately highlighted the disgraceful anti-Semitic conduct of the officers and the court. It showed that we all can do something to combat prejudice and dishonesty. Rain Butler has remarkably put together more than 1,100 items from this period in France, illustrating what an unpleasant battle of the press existed between decency and prejudice. This remarkable archive will without doubt help in the education of young people here at the University of Pennsylvania to remind us of what needs to be done. Prejudice often leads to racial intolerance and hatred, and sometimes to genocide of people worldwide. I can't really speak of any magical formula to avoid genocide. There are always ways in which fanatics can appeal to groups of people. These fanatics can from time to time achieve power by murder of those in opposition to them and through organizing armaments and military training of groups of people to dominate others amongst other methods. Diffusing hostility towards religious, ethnic, and national groups, reducing discrimination and bigotry, diluting extremism, forbidding hate crimes, and banning terrorism are all areas which need to be looked at in depth. The importance of media and human rights has risen. There are now programs that highlight other people's traditions. Greater efforts are being made to ensure that all people are represented as presenters, reporters, journalists, experts, and actors. The banning through legal means and blocking of hateful websites is in many ways counterproductive because it fans the flames of hatred behind the scenes. If one could attack their hateful literature or websites face on, it would be more effective in revealing their arguments to be not only wrong, but also illogical and ridiculous. It requires great skill to fight online hatred, to highlight its deceitfulness and false content, and promote instead values of tolerance and diversity. Large-scale monitoring of internet hatred is probably the only solution to counterattack and to avoid people being convinced and even indoctrinated by dishonest information. It will always require the skill of highly intelligent people to be able to counteract their influences. This is not by any means easy, and people have to be trained to achieve this. Youth movements in which all children can participate in multiracial and multi-faith activities have worked in many countries for a long time. Communal activities structured to envelop everyone are crucial, as is making sure that racial and religious minorities' confidence is strengthened, that they too have a say in the communities to which they belong. The education of children from the earliest ages to understand other people's traditions is today carried out in many European countries. Children visit each other's mosques, churches and synagogues and see how others worship and what this means to them without being persuaded to leave the faith of their ancestors. The Stockholm Task Force of 2000 is now working with the EU to develop Holocaust education. There are several interesting examples internationally of post-genocide rehabilitation projects for child soldiers and others, including orphans, to integrate peacefully into their communities, which have been very effective in avoiding new genocides. Since the extermination policies of the Third Reich, the Roma and Sinti have continued to suffer throughout Europe. However, today great efforts are being made in a few countries, like Slovakia, to help integrate them with their own radio stations and rich musical culture and their history being brought into schools to have children educated in their culture. There are 10 million in the European Union alone. Exclusion of people from the community can lead to unthinkable horrors. Of course, there remains a requirement for democracy with legislation, enforceable independent judiciary, military, police and legal protection, and accountability media that remains unrestrained by state control, yet also unbiased by bigotry, stereotyping and incitement of racial hatred. Discrimination can be reduced through legislation and very rigorous laws to enforce this have been developed in Europe. The danger of much of this legislation can be the surveillance of innocent people, of the population at large, in efforts to detect terrorist atrocities being contemplated. The Council of Europe, not to be confused with the European Union, the Council of Europe was founded in 1949 and is made up of 47 member states with some 800 million citizens. As the oldest international organization established to work towards European integration, it is perhaps most famous for the European Court of Human Rights, which enforces the European Convention on Human Rights dealing with the problems I've mentioned. Divided into three parts, the ECHR is set up in broad terms similar to Bills of Rights and the French Declaration of the Rights of Man. The articles also cover life, torture, servitude, liberty and security, fair trial, privacy, conscience, religion, expression, association, marriage, discrimination and other rights-related issues. The prime aim is stated very well in Article 1A of the statute. The aim of the Council of Europe is to achieve a greater unity between its members for the purpose of safeguarding and realizing the ideals and principles which are their common heritage, and facilitating the economic and social progress of the members. It gives expert advice to the European Union as well, which mostly implements its recommendations. Tackling discrimination in order to prevent genocide is not merely a case of establishing international law, in this case the ECHR, and seeking to uphold it. There is also a much larger job to be done in shaping the thoughts and actions of nations. It is this subtler, less high-profile role which has also kept the Council of Europe busy in the past 50 years. As well as action on high-profile issues such as terrorism, torture, and sexual trafficking, it has worked tirelessly at protecting cultural heritage and the linguistic rights of minority languages, promoting fair sport and cultural cooperation, and establishing youth exchanges to encourage cross-cultural education. Education among the young cannot be overemphasized, so the root causes of discrimination can be addressed. In my limited experience, it is all too easy to focus on the result of the problem rather than the cause. So while the work of countries around the world and organizations like the UN and the Council of Europe to establish laws against terrorism and genocide is to be applauded, they need to continue tackling the causes and not try to cure an infection with sticking plaster. So what are the main causes of genocide? Certainly political opportunism is part of this, when a minority is publicly depicted as the cause of the majority's problems. It is possible for this to reach proportions whereby the majority then wishes to eliminate the minority in question. When resources are not fairly shared, the unsatisfied group may in desperation conclude that there is no other option but to eliminate the group that is abusing or using those resources. When confronting daily with hunger and misery at home on one hand and extravagance of the rich on the other, it is easy to become angry and resentful. Mix into this a lack of education and opportunities and an element of discrimination and racism, and one can see how easy it is to take place. In this case, those in misery can be bought into becoming terrorists, to use an economic language, having nothing to lose and no other way ahead. This happens all over the world and is the root of many incidents of racism and discrimination. In 1993, the Council of Europe established the European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance, ECRI we call it. This independent human rights body monitors the situation with regard to racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, anti-Semitism and intolerance in each member state and makes specific recommendations to their governments. It also provides guidance through general recommendations addressed to all member states. In addition to this, the Council carries out awareness-raising campaigns throughout Europe, including the All Different, All Equal campaign targeted at youth. The Committee for Elimination of Racial Discrimination in Geneva under the UN is another organization dealing with this on an international level, as is the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, with its 56 participating states from Vancouver to Vladivostok. There are no easy answers to the issues of discrimination, no magic bullet that will end racism and prevent genocide. As a species, human beings seem to continue to perceive difference, at least initially, as something negative, failing to realize that it is possible to be in favor of one thing without being hostile to something else. It is natural to be pro what you are. The Council of Europe is an example of one body that arose from the ashes of the atrocities of the Second World War and is attempting to pursue international criminal justice through legislation and education. Criminal justice without education is a blunt instrument that in all likelihood will lead to further bloodshed. Education without legal enforcement is a toothless weapon which will demonstrate no consequences for our actions. We need both, and in a limited and struggling way, the Council of Europe and the UN has been and still is trying to fill both. I believe that the Butler collection could also be one piece of the complex jigsaw to make us aware of what can be done by anyone to bring truth and justice to those who are entitled to it.
Clemens Nathan, thank you so very much for being with us this morning.
I'm very honored and delighted.